The whistle cut through the cold morning air, and 11 fathers stood at the edge of the field with their arms crossed, waiting for a reason to leave. Marcus Webb didn't blow it again. He just watched the ball roll into the mud and stop, the way it had stopped for this team all season. And he waited for the parents to finish talking about him, like he wasn't standing 20 feet away. "He's never coached before," one of them said, not quietly. "Emma told me he used to work on cars." Marcus let that sit. He'd heard worse things said about him in rooms where the stakes were a lot higher than a Saturday morning rec league game. He crouched down, retied his daughter's shoelace where it had come loose, and told her to go get a drink of water. Then he stood up, walked to the center of the field, and started running a drill that not one of those parents had ever seen before. If you've ever been the person everyone underestimated right up until the moment you proved them wrong, you're going to want to stay with this one until the end, because what happened to this team over the next 10 weeks was not supposed to be possible. 11 weeks earlier, the Cedarbrook Youth Soccer League held its annual coaches meeting in the back room of a community center that smelled like floor wax and old coffee. 12 teams needed 12 coaches. 11 volunteers showed up. Nobody wanted the Sharks. The Sharks had gone 0-12 the previous season. Not close losses, not games decided by a single bad call. Blowouts. The kind of scoreline that made 10-year-olds stop wanting to play the sport at all. 2 girls had quit mid-season. 1 boy cried after every single game for 6 weeks straight, and his mother had pulled him out entirely by October. The league director, a tired man named Phil Ostrowski, who had been doing this job as a volunteer for 11 years, stood at the front of the room holding a clipboard like it weighed 40 pounds. "We need somebody for the Sharks," he said. "Anybody." Silence. The kind of silence where people suddenly find their shoes very interesting. Marcus Webb was standing near the back holding his daughter's hand. Maya was 10 years old, and she'd been on the Sharks the year before. She'd cried in the car after 4 of those 12 losses, and each time Marcus had said the same thing to her, low and even. Losing isn't the problem. Losing without learning is the problem. He raised his hand. Phil blinked at him. "You're Maya's dad?" "Yes. You coached before?" Marcus considered the question for a moment longer than most people would have. "Not youth league. Not here." Phil didn't ask a follow-up question because Phil was desperate, and a warm body with a pulse was a warm body with a pulse. He wrote Marcus's name on the clipboard next to the word Sharks, and that was that. Nobody in that room knew that Marcus Webb had spent 6 years playing professional soccer in Germany's 3rd division before a knee injury ended it at 26. Nobody knew he'd spent 2 more years as an assistant fitness coach for a club in Belgium before his wife got sick and he came home to Ohio to take care of her, and then after she passed, to take care of Maya alone. Nobody knew because Marcus had never told them. He fixed small engines for a living now, ran a one-man shop out of a converted garage on the edge of town, and he had decided a long time ago that the soccer part of his life was a door he didn't need to keep open. He didn't talk about it. He didn't correct people who assumed he'd never touched a ball in his life. It simply wasn't relevant to the person he was now, which was a father first, and everything else a distant second. But watching his daughter cry in the back seat of his truck 12 times in one season had a way of reordering a man's priorities. The first practice was a disaster, and Marcus had expected nothing less. 14 10-year-olds showed up on a Tuesday evening, most of them dragging their feet, a few of them openly saying they didn't think this year would be any different. Their passes were sloppy. Their spacing was non-existent, all 14 of them clustering around the ball like it was the last slice of pizza at a party. Nobody communicated, nobody looked up before they kicked. Marcus watched all of this without saying a word for the first 11 minutes, standing with his arms folded, his eyes moving over each child the way a mechanic's eyes move over an engine that won't turn over, looking not for the obvious problem, but for the first small thing that was causing all the others. He found it fast. These kids didn't lack effort, they lacked structure. Nobody had ever taught them where to stand when they didn't have the ball, which was, in Marcus's estimation, 90% of the sport that nobody bothered to teach at this age. He blew the whistle once, short and clean. "Everybody, drop the ball. We're not touching a ball today." 14 faces looked at him like he'd suggested they play in their socks. A boy named Dylan, who had scored exactly 1 goal all of last season, spoke up. "Coach, we need to practice shooting. We never score." "You don't score because you're not open when the ball gets to you," Marcus said. "Today we fix that. The ball comes back tomorrow." He spent the next 50 minutes teaching 10-year-olds how to move without the ball, triangles, spacing, when to check toward the passer, and when to spin away. It looked, to the 3 parents who had stuck around to watch from their cars, like an extremely boring practice. No goals, no drama. Just a quiet man in a gray jacket walking kids through patterns on a muddy field, correcting a shoulder angle here, a foot position there, never raising his voice, never repeating himself more than twice. Maya ran a passing triangle with 2 other girls on the far side of the field. And on the 4th repetition, something clicked. The ball moved crisp and fast between the 3 of them. 1 touch, 2 touch, a give and go. That would have looked at home in a much older game. Marcus didn't cheer. He simply nodded once, the way a man nods when a bolt finally seats the way it's supposed to, and moved on to the next group. The parents in their cars exchanged glances, but didn't say much. It didn't look like coaching, not the kind they were used to. It looked like something else, something more patient, and patience wasn't a quality that inspired much confidence in people who had already watched their kids lose 12 straight games. The first real test came 2 weeks later, in the Sharks' opening match of the new season against the Riverside Hawks, a team that had finished second in the league the year before. The parents arrived, expecting the same story. A few of them brought their phones instead of their attention, already planning to leave early if the score got embarrassing. The way it always had. It didn't get embarrassing. The Sharks lost, 4-2, but the 2 goals they scored came from the exact triangle passing pattern Marcus had drilled into them for 2 straight weeks. And more importantly, the Hawks had to work for every single one of their 4 goals. There was no coasting, no easy space to exploit. The Sharks organized themselves on defense in a way nobody recognized from the year before, tracking runners, communicating, closing gaps before the Hawks attackers could get comfortable. 4-2 looked, on paper, like a loss. It felt, to anyone who'd watched last year's team get run off the field 10-0, like something closer to a miracle. Dylan scored one of the 2 goals. He found Marcus after the final whistle, breathing hard, grinning in a way that 10-year-old boys don't often let themselves grin in front of their teammates. "We almost had them, coach. Planks." "You did have them for about 60 minutes, Marcus said. "We'll talk about the other 20 at practice." Dylan laughed, because it sounded like a joke, and then stopped laughing when he realized it wasn't one. The parents noticed the shift before they wanted to admit it out loud. A father named Rich Delacroix, whose son Tyler played center defense, cornered another parent near the parking lot after that game. "That's not beginner coaching," Rich said. "That defensive shape they held in the second half, that's a real system. Where'd this guy learn that?" Nobody had an answer because nobody had asked Marcus a single question about his background, beyond whether he was Maya's dad. Word moved through a small town the way water moves through cracked concrete, finding every gap. By the 3rd week, when the Sharks tied a team, they'd lost to 11-0 the previous season. Parents who had barely acknowledged Marcus at pickup were suddenly finding reasons to strike up conversation. "You played somewhere, didn't you?" Rich said to him one evening. Not quite a question. Marcus was packing up cones and he didn't look up right away. "A long time ago." "Where?" "Germany. Small club." "Doesn't matter now." It mattered enormously to Rich, who went home and searched every version of Marcus's name he could think of, until on the 4th try he found a decade-old roster page for a 3rd Division German club with a grainy photo of a younger Marcus Webb standing in a back row, arms crossed, unsmiling. Rich didn't confront him with it. He just started showing up, 15 minutes earlier to practice, standing a little closer to the field, watching a little more carefully. The turning point, the one people in town would still talk about years later, came in Week 6. Against the Ashford Fire, the defending league champions, a team that hadn't lost a regular season game in 2 years. Nobody expected the Sharks to compete. The Ashford coach, a loud, red-faced man named Coach Duffy, who had built something of a reputation for running up scores against weaker teams, didn't bother scouting them. Why would he? Everyone in the league still remembered the Sharks from the year before. Marcus had scouted Ashford, though. He'd gone to 2 of their games in the previous 3 weeks, standing alone at the far end of the field with a small notebook, writing almost nothing down because he didn't need to. He watched the way their fullbacks pushed too far forward when they had a lead. He watched their goalkeeper's tendency to come off his line early on crosses. He watched, most of all, the way their whole system depended on one very talented central midfielder who never once, in 2 full games, tracked back on defense. He built the entire game plan around exploiting that one gap. The Sharks won 3-1. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a lucky bounce or a bad call. The Sharks' 2 forwards spent the whole game making runs into the exact space Ashford's overextended fullbacks kept leaving open, and by the second half, Ashford's players were visibly frustrated, arguing with each other, while the Sharks moved the ball with a calm precision that looked nothing like a team that had gone winless the year before. Coach Duffy stormed across the field after the final whistle, not toward Marcus, but toward Phil Ostrowski, who happened to be standing nearby with a clipboard. "Who is this guy?" Duffy said, loud enough for half the parking lot to hear. "Where did you find him?" "He's a parent," Phil said. "Volunteered at the start of the season." "That's not a parent's game plan. That's not a rec league game plan. Somebody needs to look into this." Nobody looked into anything because there was nothing improper to find. Marcus hadn't broken a single rule. He'd simply outcoached a man who had spent 2 years assuming he'd never need to try particularly hard. But the story had legs now, and it moved fast. By week 8, 3 different clubs from outside the county had people quietly appearing at Sharks games. A club director from a well-regarded travel program 40 minutes away stood near the concession stand for an entire match, saying nothing to anyone, taking notes on his phone. A former college coach who ran skills clinics on weekends introduced himself to Marcus after a game and asked, with the particular carefulness of a man trying not to spook something valuable, where he'd trained. Marcus gave him the same 3 sentences he gave everyone. "Played a while overseas. Not relevant anymore, just trying to help these kids enjoy the game again." It wasn't false modesty. Marcus genuinely believed that chapter of his life belonged to a version of himself that no longer existed, a version that hadn't yet lost a wife and gained the singular responsibility of raising a daughter who needed him to show up, steady and present, every single day. Soccer had once been the center of his world. Now it was a tool, one he used because it turned out to be useful, in service of a much smaller and much more important world that consisted of one 10-year-old girl and the life he was building for her. Maya, for her part, had transformed over those 8 weeks in a way that had nothing to do with soccer tactics. She'd been a quiet kid the year before, the kind who hung near the back of every group photo. Now, she ran the midfield for a team that people were driving from 2 counties over to watch. She developed a habit of looking up before every pass, scanning the field the way her father had taught her, and more than one parent had commented that she seemed to see the game a full second before anyone else on the field did. At home, the soccer talk stayed simple. Marcus never lectured her at the dinner table. He asked one question after every practice and every game. Always the same question. "What did you notice today?" It wasn't about praise. What? It wasn't about criticism. It was about teaching her to watch the world carefully, to notice the small mechanical truths sitting underneath the surface of things, the same way he'd spent his whole life noticing them, first on a soccer field in Germany, then under the hood of a stranger's car, and now on a muddy rec league field in Ohio. "I noticed Sarah keeps checking over her left shoulder before she gets the ball," Maya said one night, working on a bowl of cereal. "So the other team started guarding that side." Marcus nodded slowly the way he did when something pleased him more than his face was willing to show. "What do you do about that?" "Tell her to check both shoulders, or fake left. There you go." That was the whole conversation most nights. It was enough. The parents who had once rolled their eyes at Marcus Webb now sat a little straighter in their folding chairs on Saturday mornings, and a few of them had started, without quite admitting it to themselves, treating him with something close to reverence. Rich Delacroix took to arriving early just to watch warm-ups, studying the drills like he was hoping to absorb something by proximity. The mother of the boy who had cried after every game the previous season stopped Marcus in the parking lot. One afternoon, her eyes wet and thanked him for something she couldn't quite put into words. Her son hadn't cried once all season. He'd scored 4 goals instead. Marcus accepted all of this the way he accepted most things, with a short nod and very little conversation, because none of it was the point for him. The point was a 10-year-old girl who used to sit quietly in the back seat of his truck and now talked his ear off the whole ride home about spacing and triangles and the exact moment a defender's weight shifted the wrong way. By week 10, the Sharks were 7-3. Nobody in the league could quite believe the number when they said it out loud. It was around this time that a man named Elliot Bramwell started showing up. Bramwell ran the youth development pipeline for a professional club's academy system 3 states over, the kind of program that produced actual results. Kids who went on to play in college, occasionally, kids who went further than that. He'd heard about the Sharks from the same skills clinic coach who'd approached Marcus weeks earlier, and he'd driven 4 hours on a Saturday morning based entirely on a second-hand story about a rec league team nobody could explain. He stood at the far end of the field during warm-ups, in an unmarked jacket saying nothing to anyone, and watched Marcus run a rondo drill with an intensity and precision that had no business belonging to a volunteer parent coach in a small Ohio recreation league. Bramwell had spent almost 30 years around competitive soccer. He knew what he was looking at within 4 minutes. This wasn't a talented amateur who'd stumbled into some good instincts. This was someone who had been professionally trained. Someone whose fundamentals ran so deep they'd become instinct. Someone who was, in Bramwell's private and immediate assessment, wildly overqualified to be standing on this particular field. He approached Marcus after the game, which the Sharks won comfortably, 4-1. "Elliot Bramwell," he said, extending a hand. "I run development for the academy system out of Riverton." Marcus shook his hand, said his own name, and waited, the way he always waited, for other people to decide how much of the conversation they wanted to have. "I'll be straight with you," Bramwell said. "I drove 4 hours because I heard a rumor I didn't believe. I believe it now. Where did you play?" Marcus considered him for a moment. Something in Bramwell's directness, the absence of performance in it, made him decide to answer honestly for the first time all season. "Germany, 3rd Division, 6 years. Blew out my knee at 26. Bramwell exhaled slowly. "That checks out with everything I just watched. Why are you coaching a rec league team in Ohio and not doing this professionally?" "Because my daughter plays on this team," Marcus said. "And because I have a business and a kid to raise, and that comes first. It's always come first." "I'm not asking you to abandon either of those things," Bramwell said. "I'm asking you to consider that you're wasted here. We have an under-11 academy squad that lost its coach 2 months ago. Paid position, real development pathway for these kids. And Maya, she'd have a real future in this if she wanted one, at a level you can't build for her here." Marcus looked out at the field, where Maya was gathering cones with 2 teammates, laughing about something, entirely unaware of the conversation happening 30 feet away. "I'll think about it," he said. "I'm not making a decision that affects her without her being part of it." It was the most honest answer Bramwell had gotten from anyone in years, and it told him more about the man's character than the rondo drill had. The offer sat with Marcus for a week. He didn't mention it to Maya right away, not because he was hiding it, but because he wanted to be sure of his own thinking before he brought her into it. He sat in his workshop most evenings that week, the radio low, hands moving through familiar motions, on a lawnmower engine that didn't need his full attention, and let the decision turn over slowly in the back of his mind, the way he let every important decision turn over. The truth he kept arriving at was simple. He hadn't taken this coaching job to relaunch a career he'd buried a decade earlier. He'd taken it because his daughter had cried in the back seat of his truck, and he'd decided that wasn't going to keep happening if there was something he could do about it. Everything that had followed, the scouts, the whispers, the sudden respect from parents who'd once looked past him, had been a byproduct, not a goal. But he also wasn't blind to what Bramwell was offering. A real pathway. A future for Maya that this small league, for all its heart, couldn't provide. He brought it to her on a Tuesday evening, the two of them sitting on the tailgate of his truck after practice, the field empty behind them, the sky starting to go orange at the edges. "A man came to watch you play," Marcus said. "Runs a bigger program. He offered me a coaching job there. Says you'd have a real path in this if you wanted it." Maya considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things, swinging her legs slightly against the tailgate. "Would you still be my coach, if you wanted me to be, or you could just be my daughter and let someone else coach you? Either way works." She thought about it for a long moment, longer than most adults would have given the question. "I like it here," she said finally. "I like our team. Can we stay and just get better on our own?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment, something settling in his chest that had nothing to do with soccer at all. "Yeah," he said. "We can do that." He called Bramwell 2 days later and turned the position down, not because it wasn't a good opportunity, but because it wasn't the right one. Not yet. Not at the cost of uprooting a season his daughter had built with her own hands, one triangle pass at a time. Bramwell, to his credit, didn't push. "The offer doesn't expire," he said. "When she's ready, when you're ready, call me. In the meantime, I'd like to keep sending people to watch you work if you don't mind." Consider it professional curiosity. Marcus didn't mind. Word of the offer, and the fact that Marcus had turned it down, moved through the small community even faster than the winning streak had. It changed something in how people saw him, a final piece falling into place. This wasn't a man chasing glory or trying to relive some faded athletic dream through his kid. This was a father who had quietly reordered an entire team's fortunes because it was the right thing to do for a group of 10-year-olds, and who had then turned down real professional recognition because his daughter asked him to. Rich Delacroix, who by this point had become something like an unofficial team ambassador, said it best to another parent one Saturday morning, watching Marcus run warm-ups in his gray jacket, saying little, correcting everything. "You know what the wild part is? He's not even trying to impress anybody. He's just trying to do it right." The Sharks finished the regular season 9-3. Good enough for third place in the league, a number that would have been unthinkable in September. Nobody who had watched that first practice, the one where 14 kids clustered around a ball like it was the last resource on earth, could quite reconcile that memory with the team that took the field in the season's final tournament. The championship tournament bracket put the Sharks against Ashford Fire again in the semi-final, a rematch of the game that had first put Marcus's name on everyone's lips. Coach Duffy had spent the 2 months since that loss stewing over it, and word had gotten back to Marcus through the usual channels that Duffy had told other coaches in the league he intended to put an end to whatever fluke that was in the rematch. It wasn't a fluke, and Duffy discovered exactly how not a fluke it was within the first 15 minutes. Marcus had scouted them again, of course. He always did. And Ashford, stubborn and proud, hadn't changed a single thing about their system since the first meeting. Still pushing their fullbacks too high, still leaving their overextended midfielder to fend for himself on defense. Marcus hadn't needed to build a new game plan. He'd simply run the same one, sharper, faster, with a team that had grown immeasurably more confident in the 2 months since they'd first executed it. The final score was 5-2. It wasn't particularly close. Duffy didn't storm across the field this time. He shook Marcus's hand at midfield, briefly, wordlessly, and walked off with the look of a man who had finally been forced to understand something about himself that he didn't especially want to know. The Sharks lost the championship game the following weekend, 2-1, to a team that had simply been building toward this moment for 3 straight years under the same coach. Marcus made no excuses for the loss and offered his team none to lean on. He gathered them in a circle after the final whistle, all 14 kids sitting in the grass, some of them crying, though not the way they'd cried the year before. This was a different kind of tears, the kind that comes from caring, not from being crushed. "You didn't lose today because you're not good enough," Marcus told them. "You lost because that team has had 3 years together and we've had 1 season. That gap closes. It closes because of what you all did this year, starting from nothing. Remember what nothing felt like. Then remember this." He looked around the circle. At 14 kids who had gone from dreading Saturday mornings to building an entire identity around them. Second place, In a league you finished dead last in a year ago. That's not a consolation. That's proof. Dylan, who had scored 11 goals over the course of the season, after scoring exactly one the year before, wiped his face and asked the question that had been sitting underneath the whole season, unspoken, for weeks. "Coach, are you coming back next year?" Marcus looked at Maya before he answered, an old habit by now, checking in without needing to say a word. She nodded. "Yeah," Marcus said, "I'll be here." The team's parents threw together an informal gathering at a local park the following weekend, the kind of low-key potluck affair that small towns organize instinctively when they want to mark something without making too much fuss about it. Phil Ostrowski showed up, and so unexpectedly did Elliot Bramwell, who had apparently decided that professional curiosity extended to attending a rec league potluck 4 hours from home. Phil pulled Marcus aside near the grill, holding a paper plate that was doing very little to hide the awkwardness of what he was about to say. "I owe you an apology," Phil said. "Nobody wanted this team. I put your name on that clipboard because I was desperate, not because I thought you'd do anything with it. That was wrong of me. You gave me a chance nobody else was willing to give," Marcus said. "There's nothing to apologize for. There's a Coach of the Year award this league's never actually given out, because usually nobody's earned it," Phil said. "The board voted this week. It's yours, if you want it." Marcus took it the way he took most recognition, with a short nod and a quiet thank you, and set the plaque down on the picnic table without much ceremony, because the actual reward, the one that mattered, was standing 30 feet away with a paper cup of lemonade, laughing with a group of girls who 1 year earlier hadn't wanted to look up from the ground during warm-ups. Bramwell found him a few minutes later watching the same scene. "Offer's still open," Bramwell said. "No pressure. Just wanted you to know, the door doesn't close because you said no once." "I appreciate that," Marcus said. "Maybe in a year or two, if she still wants it. Right now, she wants her friends and her Saturday mornings on this field. I'm not going to be the one who takes that from her." "Most people in your position would have jumped at it," Bramwell said. "The recognition, the paycheck, the chance to prove something to everybody who ever underestimated them." Marcus considered that for a moment, watching Maya laugh at something one of her teammates said, the late afternoon sun catching the grass behind her. "I already proved what I needed to prove," he said. "A long time ago to myself, before any of this. This year wasn't about that. This year was about her." Bramwell nodded slowly, understanding settling over him the way it settles over most people who spend enough time around Marcus Webb, the recognition that they were looking at a man who measured his own worth by an entirely different set of instruments than the ones most people used, and who had never once needed anyone else's scoreboard to know exactly who he was. The following season, the Sharks didn't sneak up on anybody. Other coaches scouted them the way Marcus had once scouted Ashford, and the league itself changed a little because of it. Other volunteer coaches suddenly asking Marcus questions before practices, borrowing drills, trying to close the gap he'd shown them was possible to close. He answered every question patiently, gave away every drill freely because none of it had ever been about protecting some competitive secret. It had been about a group of kids who deserved better than to spend their Saturday mornings dreading a scoreboard. And if other teams got better because of what he'd shown them, that was simply more kids who got to feel what his own daughter's team had felt this year. Maya kept a small notebook now, one Marcus had given her at the start of the second season, and she filled it with the same kinds of observations he'd once written by hand at soccer fields in Germany a lifetime ago. Shoulder angles, weight distribution, the half-second before a defender commits to the wrong side. On the drive home after the first practice of the new season, she looked over at him from the passenger seat, mud still drying on her cleats. "Dad," she said, "what did you notice today?" It was the question he'd asked her 100 times over the past year, coming back to him now in her voice, and something in his chest loosened at the sound of it. Quiet and warm, the kind of feeling a man doesn't often find words for. "I noticed. You're starting to see the game the way I used to," he said. "That's a good thing to notice." She smiled and looked back out the window, and Marcus drove them home past the field where all of it had started, a season ago, with 14 kids who didn't know how to stand still, and a father who had raised his hand in a quiet room because nobody else would. Nobody had needed to know where he'd played or what he'd once been for any of it to matter. The work had spoken for itself, the way it always did, slow and patient and undeniable, one triangle pass at a time, until the whole town could see what had been standing quietly in front of them the entire time.